The low hum of the plane's engines did little to mask the rising tension. Cassandra sat by the window, her fingers gripping the armrest as the cabin buzzed with the typical hum of pre-flight chatter. It was just another routine flight to Chicago, nothing she hadn't done dozens of times. Yet as the final passengers settled in, something felt wrong. She shifted in her seat, glancing over at the flight attendant, a blonde woman in her late 20s, who was now eyeing her from across the aisle. Cassandra had noticed the woman's gaze earlier, but it was the second look, quick, almost imperceptible, that made her stomach churn. Seconds later, the flight attendant approached, her face frozen in an uninviting smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone too clipped to be casual. "I need to ask you to step off the plane. There's been a complaint." Cassandra's mind raced, her heart pounding in disbelief. A complaint? She glanced around, hoping to see a familiar face, but all the other passengers were avoiding her gaze. The flight attendant's eyes hardened. "Yes, you need to leave now." She stood up, her body trembling with both fear and frustration. "What did I do?" she whispered, voice barely audible. "You'll find out," the attendant responded coldly. The door to the plane loomed in front of her like an abyss. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away, refusing to meet hers. The sting of isolation hit her all at once. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation. It was a quiet understanding that the moment she stepped off that plane, she would be nothing more than a troublemaker, a disruptive passenger. She stepped toward the door, but before the attendant could open it, the voice of the captain rang out over the intercom, louder than any announcement she'd ever heard. "We are terribly sorry, ma'am, but the situation needs to be handled differently. Please return to your seat. We are not going anywhere." The low hum of the plane's engines did little to mask the rising tension. Cassandra had always prided herself on being a calm flyer, the kind who would close her eyes and drift off into the hum of the cabin, escaping into her thoughts before the plane even left the runway. But today, there was something in the air, something that didn't sit right. She sat by the window, her fingers gripping the armrest. It was just another routine flight to Chicago, but something was different, something she couldn't quite place. She was scrolling through her phone, tuning out the chatter of the other passengers around her, when she noticed her flight attendant, a young woman with platinum blonde hair tied into a neat bun, staring at her, not in the casual, professional way one might glance at a passenger to ensure they're comfortable. No, this look was different. It was assessing, lingering. Cassandra shifted in her seat, brushing the back of her hand across her forehead in an attempt to shake off the sensation of discomfort. The flight attendant turned, seemingly unaware of the stare, and continued down the aisle, but just as quickly, she returned. She stopped just a few feet away from Cassandra, her gaze never leaving her. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone sharp. "I need to ask you to step off the plane." Cassandra blinked, her stomach churning. "What?" she said, voice rising in disbelief. "Why? What did I do?" "There's been a complaint," the attendant said, her lips tight, her smile barely there. "Please come with me." Cassandra's body went stiff, and her mouth went dry. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, some in curiosity, others in discomfort. But no one said a word, no one stepped in. Cassandra began, struggling to find her voice, but the words stuck in her throat. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling as she made her way to the aisle. Her heart raced. Was this really happening? The attendant didn't wait for her to ask more questions. She reached for the overhead compartment, as though this was routine, grabbing her belongings with mechanical precision. "You need to leave now," the attendant said. "Please," Cassandra whispered, her voice breaking. "What did I do? Why am I being singled out?" "I'm not the one who made a complaint," the attendant said with a shrug. Her voice was colder now, dismissive. "You'll have to take it up with the captain." As they neared the plane's exit, Cassandra turned to look at the other passengers. A few met her gaze, but most avoided it. She felt her heart sink. But just as the attendant reached for the door, the captain's voice boomed over the intercom. "Excuse me, ma'am," the captain said, his voice suddenly filled with urgency. "Please return to your seat." There's been a misunderstanding. We are not going anywhere until we resolve this." Cassandra froze, her hand still hovering near the door, her stomach twisted with confusion. The passengers around her were silent, watching, waiting. She looked at the attendant, who seemed just as surprised as she was, before reluctantly walking back to her seat. The cabin felt cold, a stark contrast to the warmth she'd felt when she first boarded. As she sat down, the words hung in the air, thick with unanswered questions. "Thank you," the captain's voice echoed, though it felt like a distant echo. "We apologize for the inconvenience." But Cassandra wasn't listening anymore. She couldn't hear anything over the deafening silence of the room. Cassandra's heart pounded as she sank back into her seat. She barely registered the click of the seatbelt fastening or the whispers from the rows behind her. The world outside the window seemed distant, surreal, like a film reel in slow motion. The captain's voice had barely faded when the flight attendant who'd caused the scene appeared beside her. She stood there for a moment, staring down at Cassandra, eyes hard, as if this wasn't some monumental injustice, but simply an inconvenience. "We're terribly sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, almost robotic in her apology. There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That was all she had to say. Cassandra's jaw clenched. "A misunderstanding? You just kicked me off the plane in front of everyone, and now you're calling it a misunderstanding." Her voice came out more strained than she intended. The attendant shifted on her feet, eyes darting nervously. "Please, calm down. The situation has been addressed. We're going to proceed with the flight. Just a small matter to resolve." The word resolve stung more than it should have. How could they resolve this? Cassandra had been humiliated in front of the entire flight, singled out and forced to leave with no explanation, no justification. She wasn't going to just accept this and move on. The plane was still on the tarmac, the engines humming idly beneath them. Cassandra looked out the window, trying to steady herself, trying to regain some sense of control. The passengers around her were still stiff, unsure what just happened, as if they'd been waiting for someone to stand up to challenge the absurdity of it all. But no one had. The attendant hovered awkwardly at her side. "You'll be contacted by the airline's customer service when we land. Just follow the procedure, and they'll assist you." Customer service. As if a few polite words could erase the stain of this moment. Cassandra turned her gaze toward the window again, trying not to cry, trying not to feel the sting of anger building in her chest. The plane finally began to taxi, the roar of the engines rising, drowning out everything else. Cassandra could barely hear the sounds of the seatbelt sign clicking off or the gentle announcement of the takeoff. She felt numb, a sinking pit opening in her stomach. How could this have happened? The confusion from earlier had faded into a cold, hard reality. No one had come to her defense. No one had spoken up. Not one passenger had raised a voice to question what was happening. Her mind raced, looking for answers, seeking an explanation, but it all led back to the same place. Her. She was the reason. There was something about the way the flight attendant had looked at her before the incident. Something cold in the way she had singled her out that sent a shiver down Cassandra's spine. Was this some sort of subconscious bias? Or was it something more deliberate? Cassandra had heard the whispers before, the way some people looked at her with judgment in their eyes. A brief moment of discomfort when they realized she didn't fit the mold they were used to seeing. What had it been about her that had caused this reaction? Was it her skin? Her presence? So different from everyone else on that flight? She tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to her like a shadow. The announcement came for the plane to begin its climb into the sky, but Cassandra remained rooted in her seat, her mind caught in a spiral. A few of the other passengers shifted in their seats, subtly glancing over at her, but none of them dared to meet her eyes. It was as if they had agreed, collectively, that speaking up would only cause trouble. She was the troublemaker. She could feel the weight of the silence around her, the quiet acceptance of injustice. She wasn't sure which hurt more, the incident itself or the realization that no one cared enough to stand up for her. No one had said a word when she'd been dragged off the plane. No one had protested or demanded an explanation. There were no champions here, only bystanders. Her phone buzzed in her bag, a welcome distraction from the suffocating tension. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with her sister Sarah's name. She stared at it for a moment, unsure if she was ready to talk, unsure if she could even find the words to describe what just happened. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hey, Sarah," she said, trying to sound normal. "I saw the post." Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. "What the hell happened? I'm so angry for you right now. You need to talk to someone. This isn't right." Cassandra's voice faltered. "I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do." "I'm so sorry, Cass," Sarah continued, her voice softer now. "But you can't let them get away with this. You need to take action. You need to speak up." Cassandra felt the weight of Sarah's words pressed down on her. But how? Who would listen? Who would care enough to make this right? "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel like they've already decided what kind of person I am. No one's going to believe me." "They will," Sarah reassured her. "We'll make them." As Cassandra held the phone to her ear, she tried to take comfort in her sister's words, but deep down, she feared that nothing would ever change, that nothing would ever be enough to undo the damage. And worst of all, she feared that she had already lost the battle before it had even begun. The flight continued its ascent, a mechanical hum filling the silence that clung to the cabin. Cassandra sat in her seat, her gaze cast down, trying to ignore the weight of the eyes that subtly flickered her way. She could feel the unease in the air, the undercurrent of tension that had settled around her like a thick fog. But no one spoke. No one acknowledged the injustice. Across the aisle, a man in a crisp business suit fidgeted with his briefcase, his eyes darting nervously toward her. But he quickly looked away. A woman 2 rows ahead of her sat with her arms crossed, her lips pressed tight, as though unwilling to engage, unwilling to make a scene. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. How could they all just sit there? How could they watch, but do nothing? Her eyes landed on a young couple a few seats down, the woman whispering something into man's ear, her eyes flickering between the aisle and Cassandra. She could see the judgment in their glances, the way they seemed to know what had happened, without needing to say a word. The silent communication between them, the whispered assumptions, was palpable. Cassandra could almost hear their thoughts. She must have done something wrong. She must have been disruptive. But she hadn't. She hadn't said a word, hadn't moved a muscle except to protest the injustice. Still, it didn't matter. The weight of their silence, their complicity, was louder than any words could ever be. It was as though, in the absence of any vocal condemnation, they had all silently agreed on her guilt. Cassandra didn't know what was worse, the cruelty of the flight attendant or the quiet acceptance from everyone else. She closed her eyes, willing herself to breathe. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask them what the hell was wrong with them. But what good would it do? It would only make her the problem, the troublemaker they had labeled her as from the moment she stepped on the plane. She was the one who had to leave. She was the one who didn't belong. The murmur of voices, the gentle clink of drink carts, and the soft rustle of clothing filled the air, but it felt far away, as if she were drowning in her own thoughts. Even the sound of the engines, once so familiar and calming, now felt alien, an oppressive hum that amplified the distance between her and the rest of the world. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in the dark corners of her mind, but the feeling of isolation only deepened as time wore on. A few rows behind her, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair glanced up from her magazine. Their eyes met for the briefest of moments, and for a split second, Cassandra thought she saw something. Sympathy, perhaps, or regret. The woman's lips parted as though she might speak, but the moment passed too quickly, and the woman quickly averted her gaze, returning to her reading as though nothing had happened. The silence was suffocating. The tension in the air thickened. But it wasn't just about the incident. It was about everything that followed, about the unspoken agreement to let it slide, to let Cassandra bear the brunt of it alone. Cassandra felt the sting of betrayal, a deeper wound than anything the flight attendant had inflicted. These people, her fellow passengers, had witnessed what had happened. They had seen it with their own eyes, and yet they hadn't acted. They hadn't come to her defense. Not one of them had said anything. Even as she was dragged from the plane, like a criminal, she turned her head toward the window, the cold glass reflecting her weary face. The clouds drifted lazily beneath her, a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside. But the distance from the ground, from the people who had allowed her to be humiliated, did nothing to ease her pain. How had it become so easy to turn away, to ignore the injustice happening right in front of them? Cassandra glanced around the cabin again, her eyes landing on another passenger, an older man in his mid-50s, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He seemed completely unbothered by the entire ordeal, his attention focused on a small screen in front of him. It was as if he were pretending she didn't exist, pretending he hadn't seen the whole thing unfold. Her stomach twisted, the bile of anger rising in her throat. If they couldn't even bring themselves to stand up for what was right, then what kind of world were they living in? It was then that the woman from a few rows ahead, the one who had whispered to her partner earlier, spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tentative, uncertain. "Are you okay?" Cassandra turned to face her, startled by the question. The woman's gaze was sympathetic, her features soft with concern, but there was a wariness in her eyes, an apprehension that was impossible to miss. Cassandra opened her mouth to respond, to thank her, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't like what happened back there," the woman continued, her voice low, as though trying to keep the conversation private. "I didn't agree with it. I don't think you should have been kicked off." "Thank you," Cassandra said quietly, the words almost too heavy to say. But before she could say anything else, the woman quickly looked away, her gaze darting nervously to her partner, who had stopped pretending to be engrossed in his phone and was now watching them both, his expression unreadable. The moment was fleeting. The woman's brief attempt at solidarity ended as quickly as it had begun. Cassandra's chest tightened with frustration, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. It wasn't enough. No, it was far from enough. As she turned back toward the window, she realized the truth. They were all complicit, and I was alone. Cassandra's phone buzzed again, the familiar sound pulling her out of her reverie. The cabin was quiet now, the murmurs of passengers subdued as they settled into their own worlds. She glanced down at the screen and saw Sarah's name flashing across it. Her sister had called multiple times since the incident, but Cassandra hadn't been ready to talk, hadn't been ready to face what had just happened. Now, as the plane leveled out and the turbulent emotions inside her began to settle into a cold knot in her stomach, she finally answered. "Cass." Sarah's voice came through loud and clear, filled with concern and something else. Anger, maybe. "What the hell is going on?" "I saw the post you made. What happened on that plane?" Cassandra leaned back in her seat, her fingers clutching the phone tightly. She had only posted a short status on social media, try and make sense of the chaos. A vague message, but enough to make her sister ask the question. She didn't know what she was supposed to say, how to explain something that felt like it didn't make sense, even to her. She had just been trying to survive the moment, but now, the words felt heavier than ever. "I don't know, Sarah," she whispered, her voice shaking. I was sitting there, minding my own business, and then they came for me. The flight attendant. She just came over, looked me up and down, and told me to leave, in front of everyone. And when I asked why, she wouldn't even say, just told me to leave the plane. It was humiliating. I didn't do anything. I swear I didn't." "I know you didn't do anything," Sarah replied, her voice growing firmer. "But you can't let this slide. You can't just let them get away with it. This isn't about you being difficult. This is about them targeting you because of who you are. We both know that." Cassandra closed her eyes, her heart aching at the truth in her sister's words. It wasn't about her, not really. It was about something much bigger, something far more insidious than she'd ever fully allowed herself to see. "I didn't want to make a scene," Cassandra said, her words tinged with guilt. "I didn't want to cause a disruption. I just wanted to get to Chicago, get off the plane, and move on. But I don't know. It feels like I've been slapped, like I'm the one at fault. Everyone is just silent. No one saying anything. The other passengers, the staff, the people around me, they all just let it happen." Sarah's voice softened. I know it hurts. But that silence, that's part of the problem. People like you, people like me, we're always the ones left to pick up the pieces. We're expected to deal with the fallout alone. You've been dealing with this your whole life, haven't you? Cassandra bit her lip, holding back tears. She thought about the countless times she had swallowed her anger, had let microaggressions slide, had ignored the small slights, the sideways glances, the assumptions that followed her wherever she went. She had learned early that sometimes it was easier to just let things go, to stay quiet, to keep her head down. But now, it felt like that quiet had only led her here, to this moment of injustice. Yeah, Cassandra said softly, the weight of the years pressing down on her chest. I've always just let it go, but now it feels like it's too much. I don't know if I can let it slide this time. You don't have to, Sarah reassured her. You don't have to go through this alone. You've got me, and we'll fight this. You have to take action, Cass. You have to let people know what happened. You can't let them get away with it. You don't deserve to be treated like this. No one does. Cassandra's throat tightened as Sarah's words sank in. She wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that speaking up would bring justice, that it would make a difference. But the reality of the situation, the power imbalance between her and the airline, the other passengers who had silently watched, it all felt so overwhelming. What if no one believes me? Cassandra asked, her voice cracking. What if they just make me look like the angry black woman who caused scene? That's what they always do, isn't it? Sarah said, her voice sharp with righteous fury. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as a problem. But you're not the problem, Cass. You're the one who was wronged. You don't let them take your power. Cassandra sat in silence for a moment, the words echoing in her mind. She didn't have the answers yet, but something in Sarah's voice, a fire, a determination, made her feel like there might be a chance. She wasn't alone. Okay, Cassandra finally said, her voice firmer than before. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll see a lawyer when we land. I can't just let this slide. But I don't know if I can handle the fallout. You don't have to do it alone, Sarah said again, the gentleness of her words offering a small comfort. We'll handle it together. The sound of the plane's engines filled the silence between them, the rumble steady and unyielding. Cassandra looked out the window again, the dark sky stretching endlessly in front of her. It felt like 1,000 miles away from the city she was headed to, from the people she would soon face. But as the minutes ticked by, her resolve began to harden. Maybe she couldn't stop what had happened, but she wasn't going to let it define her. Not this time. I'll do it, Cassandra said, her voice quieter but stronger now. I'll speak up. I'll take them to court if I have to. This ends now. Her sister's voice was full of pride when she spoke next. That's my girl. Cassandra smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She still didn't know what the outcome would be. But at least now, she was no longer alone in this fight. The meeting with Lisa, her lawyer, felt surreal. Cassandra sat across from her, the sterile light of the office glaring down on them both. The polished wood desk, the neat stacks of papers, the slight hum of the air conditioning. Everything felt so formal, so detached from the pain she had experienced just a few days ago. So what's the plan? Cassandra asked, her voice sounding small in the vastness of the room. Lisa, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, set down her pen and looked directly at her. We're going to make this as public as possible, she said firmly. You've already made an impact with your social media posts. That's good. But now we need to gather everything. Details of the incident, any evidence you can provide, the names of the other passengers who were there, and the statements you've already given to the airline. We'll start with the company's internal investigation, but I'm not holding my breath for them to do the right thing. Cassandra nodded, feeling a chill in her spine at the thought of the airline's so-called investigation. After the tweet they had sent out, a generic apology that didn't even address the racism she had faced. It was clear they were more interested in public relations than making amends. Still, she had to push through. She had to do this. She couldn't let them get away with it. I just don't know where to start, Cassandra confessed, her voice wavering slightly. I feel like no one's going to take me seriously. People are already calling me the angry black woman. They're twisting everything I say, trying to make it seem like I'm the problem. Lisa's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. We've got a case. The way you were treated, Being kicked off a plane like that, in front of everyone, that's a violation of your rights. And the fact that they didn't give you a valid reason, that they didn't even attempt to offer an explanation, it speaks volumes. But we need to be prepared. We're going to have to prove that the airline mishandled this and acted out of racial bias. Cassandra felt her chest tighten at the thought of reliving that moment, of putting herself in a position where she'd be forced to rehash every painful second of being humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time: determination. She couldn't just be a passive victim of this injustice. She couldn't let the airline sweep it under the rug. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firmer now. "I'm not letting them make me invisible. Not this time." Lisa nodded. "Good. I'll handle the legal aspects, but I'll need you to focus on collecting your own evidence. Write down everything you remember from that day, especially the moments leading up to and after you were removed from the plane. Who was there? What did they say? Who was complicit and who remained silent?" The words stung, but Lisa's matter-of-fact tone grounded her. She had to confront the reality of what had happened, the way her fellow passengers had stood by, saying nothing, doing nothing. It was clear now that the silence had been as much a part of the injustice as the flight attendants' actions. "I don't know the names of the passengers," Cassandra admitted, "but I could ask around. I'm sure some people took pictures or videos." Perfect. Social media can be a powerful tool in cases like this. We'll get everything we can and, if necessary, take legal action. But Lisa added, looking up from her notes, "We need to be strategic. We don't want to go in guns blazing without all the facts." Cassandra nodded, but doubt crept in. Would anything she did make a difference? Would the airline listen? Would anyone listen? Before she could voice her concerns, Lisa leaned forward slightly, her expression intense. "You're not alone in this, Cassandra. People are watching. They are listening. Your story is already causing waves. And the more we gather, the more pressure we can put on them to make it right." The reassurance was small, but it was enough to push back the uncertainty gnawing at her. She had started this for herself, but now it felt bigger. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced, ignored, pushed aside. She wasn't the only one who had faced racial bias. She wasn't the only one who had been dismissed or treated as less than human. She was a part of something larger now. She had a voice, and she was going to use it. "I'll do what you need," Cassandra said, her voice stronger. "I'll get you everything. I'll get those names. And I'll start talking to the other passengers who were on the flight." Lisa smiled faintly, a sign of approval. "That's the spirit. We'll move fast. The sooner we have everything, the sooner we can hit them where it hurts." Cassandra sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of what was ahead of her. The pressure was mounting, but she wasn't afraid. This was her fight now. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The door to the office opened, and a secretary walked in with a pile of papers for Lisa. As she handed them over, she gave Cassandra a quick smile. "You've got this," she said softly, her words almost like a quiet affirmation. Cassandra gave a tight smile in return, though her heart was still racing. There was no turning back. She had taken the first step, and now she would do everything she could to make sure her voice, and the voices of those who were so often silenced, would be heard. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Cassandra wasn't walking alone anymore. Police stopped black women for suspicion. They end up apologizing publicly. Cassandra's life was no longer her own. It had become a spectacle, a legal battle that spanned the months ahead, its weight pressing down on her every waking moment. She couldn't escape the constant phone calls, the endless meetings, the barrage of media attention. The pressure was suffocating, but it was also exhilarating. It felt like something bigger than her was at stake now. The first few days after meeting with Lisa, Cassandra threw herself into gathering evidence. She scoured through her social media, reaching out to anyone who had commented or shared their own accounts of what had happened on the flight. It felt like scavenging through the wreckage, piecing together fragments of the truth from strangers' tweets and posts. Each new piece of evidence she uncovered was both a victory and a reminder how alone she had felt in those first moments after being removed from the plane. She contacted the other passengers on the flight. Some responded immediately, eager to share their own accounts. Others hesitated, unsure of how to get involved. A few even expressed regret for not doing more to intervene in the moment. One woman, an older white passenger who had sat across the aisle from Cassandra, wrote her a lengthy email. "I still think about what happened, and I'm ashamed of how I didn't speak up. You didn't deserve to be treated that way. I wish I'd stood up for you." The apology was heartfelt, but it did little to assuage Cassandra's anger. The moment had passed, and nothing could change what had been done. But still, she saved the email. It was evidence. Evidence that Cassandra wasn't the only one who had recognized the injustice, even if no one had acted on it. The first media interview came quickly. Lisa had arranged it, just a local news segment, nothing major, but enough to get her message across. Cassandra sat in front of the camera, her nerves almost unbearable. She had spent hours rehearsing her words, trying to find a balance between being composed and being authentic. When the interviewer, a man in his 40s with graying hair, asked her to recount the events of the flight, Cassandra's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I was on a plane to Chicago, just like everyone else," she began, her voice steady, though she could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "The flight was boarding. I was seated, and everything was normal. Then, without warning, a flight attendant approached me and told me I needed to leave the plane. No explanation, no reason, just I needed to go." The interviewer, his expression sympathetic, nodded. "You didn't get an explanation?" "No," Cassandra said, shaking her head. "She wouldn't even tell me what the issue was. She didn't give me a chance to explain myself or to ask questions. And when I tried to protest, she just told me to leave, in front of everyone. No one stood up for me." The words hit harder than she expected. It was the first time she had said them aloud, and the weight of them made her chest tighten. But she had to keep going. She had to show the world what had happened. "They didn't just remove me from the plane," Cassandra continued, her voice stronger now. "They humiliated me. They made me feel like I was a problem, a troublemaker. And the worst part? No one said anything. No one stood up for me. I wasn't just kicked off a flight. I was made invisible." The interviewer gave her a moment, allowing the weight of her words to hang in the air. "And since then, what has the airline done to address this?" he asked, his tone more probing. "Nothing," Cassandra replied, her voice flat. "They sent out a tweet. They gave me a generic apology. They said they were investigating. But I know what that means. It means they'll say whatever they need to keep their reputation intact. But nothing will change. Not unless we make them change." It wasn't the most polished answer, but it was honest. And Cassandra knew that honesty was her weapon. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was demanding accountability. The interview aired the following evening. Her phone buzzed nonstop as soon as the segment ended. Her social media exploded with comments. Some were supportive. People telling her they were behind her, that they had witnessed similar injustices and were glad she was speaking out. Others were more vicious. The racist comments continued, calling her every name in the book, accusing her of faking the entire incident. But Cassandra kept reading. She couldn't stop. She needed to know who was out there, who was listening, and who would stand beside her. Each comment, each message, fueled her resolve. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and media coverage. The airline, of course, was doing everything they could to protect their reputation. Lisa had received a letter from the company's legal team offering a settlement. They wanted to avoid a lawsuit, but the offer was a low-ball figure, one that made it clear they were hoping to buy Cassandra's silence. Lisa was livid. "They think they can just throw money at this and make it go away," she said. "They're underestimating you, Cassandra." Cassandra felt sick at the thought of taking the money. She didn't want compensation. She didn't want their apology wrapped in a check. What she wanted was justice. What she wanted was for the airline to acknowledge the systemic racism that had led to her treatment and to make real changes. She turned the settlement down. Lisa was surprised, but not disappointed. "I'll take it from here," she said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We're going to take this to court." The decision was made. The battle had escalated from a simple incident to a full-scale legal war. Cassandra knew this was going to be harder than anything she had ever done. She knew that the fight for justice would come with its costs, the long hours, the public scrutiny, the emotional toll. But she also knew that she couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. This wasn't just about the airline anymore. It wasn't even just about her. This was about a system that allowed people like her to be treated as less than. And Cassandra was going to make sure the world knew that. The day the trial started, Cassandra could barely breathe. It wasn't the courtroom's cold, sterile atmosphere or the rows of onlookers that had her stomach in knots. It was the weight of the fight ahead. The past few weeks had been a blur of legal strategy sessions, depositions, and more media appearances than she could count. Every time she thought about what she was up against, her mind raced with a mixture of fear and determination. But now, here she was, standing in front of the judge, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. Lisa had prepared her well, explaining the ins and outs of court procedures and how to handle the inevitable questions about her emotions, her reactions. But nothing had prepared her for the reality of being scrutinized like this, under the glaring lights, in front of an audience. She couldn't help but notice the way the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, all eyes on her as she took the witness stand. The defense attorney, a slick middle-aged man in a suit that reeked of privilege, stepped up to cross-examine her. He had been working for the airline for years, representing them in dozens of cases like hers, and Cassandra could already see the smirk on his face as he prepared to tear her down. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice smooth and dismissive, "you've testified that you were removed from the plane for no reason, correct?" "Yes," Cassandra said, her voice steady, though her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "I was told to leave without any explanation, and when I asked why, I was only told that I needed to go." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to plant seeds of doubt. "But you understand that sometimes flight attendants have to make decisions for the safety and comfort of all passengers, don't you? Perhaps there was an issue with your behavior that led them to take action." Cassandra fought the urge to scoff, holding her gaze steady. "I wasn't disruptive. I wasn't causing any trouble. I was seated, following the rules. The only reason I was removed was because of the flight attendant's decision, and there was no valid explanation given. I wasn't given a chance to explain myself." The attorney paused, seemingly calculating his next move. "So you're saying that the airline acted improperly without cause, and that you were treated unfairly solely because of your race?" There was the accusation she had known would come. It wasn't just about her actions. It wasn't about what had happened in the moment. It was about her being the angry black woman, the stereotype that people so often pin on those who dare to challenge authority. "Yes," Cassandra said firmly, her voice unwavering. "The flight attendant singled me out, and no one, not one of the other passengers, spoke up. No one came to my defense when I was removed from that plane. The airline's actions were unjust, and they were rooted in bias." The lawyer smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "And you're sure this was about race, Ms. Williams? Are you claiming that the flight attendant removed you simply because of your skin color, and not because of some other reason?" Cassandra's breath caught. For a moment, the courtroom felt like it was closing in around her. She saw the faces of the jurors, watching her, waiting for her response. But then her mind cleared. She thought about the countless times in her life that she had been treated as less than, as invisible, simply because of her race. She thought about how she had spent years excusing those moments, telling herself it wasn't worth the fight. But now, standing here, it all came rushing back. "Yes," she said, her voice rising, growing stronger with each word. "It was about race. The way I was treated wasn't just about my actions on the plane. It was about the assumption that because I'm black, I don't belong, that I'm somehow a threat or a disruption. That's why I was singled out, why I was treated the way I was." The room was silent. The defense attorney looked momentarily thrown off guard, but he quickly recovered, returning to his polished, rehearsed demeanor. "Thank you, Ms. Williams. No further questions." As he sat down, Cassandra let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. It wasn't over yet, but she had said it. She had spoken the truth that had been buried beneath so many layers of fear and shame. The hardest part wasn't admitting it to the courtroom. It was admitting it to herself. But now that she couldn't go back. Lisa leaned in close as the judge called for a break. "You did great," she whispered, offering a brief, encouraging smile. "We've got this. Keep your head up. This is just the beginning." Cassandra nodded, though her mind was still reeling. The hardest part was still to come. The verdict, the public fallout, the endless questions about whether she was fighting for herself or for something larger. But as she sat back in her chair, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had fought for herself before, but now she was fighting for every person who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or unimportant. The trial continued, each day bringing new challenges, new questions, but Cassandra stood firm. As the days wore on, the weight of the case began to feel more like a responsibility than a burden. She had come this far, and she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let them turn her into a footnote in a system that had ignored too many voices for too long. And as the days turned into weeks and the trial neared its conclusion, Cassandra knew one thing for sure. No matter what happened, she had already won. Her voice had been heard, and the world would never be the same. The court case had stretched on longer than Cassandra had anticipated. Each day felt like an eternity, filled with legal jargon, long hours, and more questions about her character than about what had actually happened. The legal team had pressed hard, calling witness after witness, presenting evidence, and forcing the airline into a corner. But despite all of it, Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that the emotional toll was far greater than any legal win would ever be. By now, her face had become familiar to many. The media had followed her every step, capturing her every moment. Some days, it felt as if the world was watching her every move, waiting for her to crack. Some days she was tempted to. The constant interviews, the phone calls, the emails, it was all too much. But no matter how exhausting it was, no matter how many times she wanted to quit, Cassandra couldn't back down now. The stakes were too high, and she couldn't let herself be swallowed by the weight of it all. Sarah had been a constant source of support, as had Lisa, who made sure Cassandra stayed focused on the legal side of things. But the emotional side of the battle, that was something no one could prepare her for. The more Cassandra thought about what had happened, the more it hurt. It was the little things, the glances from strangers, the uncomfortable silences when people realized she was different, the assumption that she was somehow other. She thought about the looks she had gotten from the other passengers on that flight, the way they had turned away when she needed help the most, the way their silence had spoken louder than any words could. It was as if the very act of speaking up, of asking for justice, had made her the enemy. Some days it was too much. Cassandra found herself struggling to stay focused, to keep going when her mind kept returning to the isolation she felt. She had been through so many layers of rejection and hardship in her life, but this felt different. This was public. This was personal, and it was slowly wearing her down. One evening, after a particularly long day of testimony, Cassandra sat at the small dining table in her apartment, her head resting in her hands. The fatigue was overwhelming, seeping into her bones and clouding her thoughts. Sarah had offered to come over, but Cassandra needed space, needed silence to collect herself. The apartment was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she had lived with over the past few months. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. She tried to focus on the flickering light from her lamp, but her mind kept drifting back to the faces of the passengers who had witnessed the incident and the way they had turned their backs on her. Had anyone truly cared? She had been humiliated. She had been dragged through this battle for what felt like an eternity. And for what? To prove that she wasn't wrong for being angry? To prove that the system was broken? She was questioning the very foundation of it all, feeling as though the battle was becoming less about justice and more about her personal exhaustion. Her phone buzzed on the table, the vibration cutting through her thoughts. It was another email from Lisa. She opened it with a heavy sigh, already knowing what it would say. Updates, legal matters, progress. But this email was different. It was a single sentence, buried in a pile of legal jargon. The airline's board is now willing to settle for a public apology and a monetary offer. They want this over. Cassandra stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. A settlement, the very thing she had rejected when it was first offered. A public apology, empty words, designed to make the public forget. Money, offered to buy her silence. The tears she had been holding back all day finally broke through. She wiped her face, trying to keep it together, but the emotional weight of everything was too much. She thought about what it would mean. She thought about how the settlement might bring her relief from the exhaustion, from the scrutiny, from the endless battle. It was tempting, so tempting. But deep down, Cassandra knew that accepting the settlement would be a compromise. It would be a surrender. And she couldn't do that, not after everything she had fought for. The question now wasn't whether she should take the money. It was whether she had the strength to keep fighting when the fight felt so draining, so unrelenting. It wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about something bigger, something far more personal. She wasn't fighting for a check. She was fighting for herself, for every black person who had been made to feel small, for every person who had been dismissed because of their race. She was fighting for a world that didn't treat people like her as second-class citizens. But could she keep going? Was it worth it? Cassandra looked out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on her shoulders, but she couldn't let it break her. She had already come this far. She had already endured more than she thought she ever could. She had already stood up to an entire system that didn't want to acknowledge her humanity. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't let the toll of this battle stop her from seeing it through. With a sigh, she reached for her phone and typed a response to Lisa. "I'm not taking the settlement. We're going to finish this." As she hit send, a quiet resolve settled over her. The emotional cost had been high, and it was only getting higher. But Cassandra wasn't backing down. She had already given too much to walk away now. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was a few weeks later, when the final ruling came in. Cassandra sat in the courtroom, flanked by Lisa and her team, the tension palpable. The judge had deliberated for what seemed like an eternity, and now, finally, they were about to hear the outcome of the trial that had consumed so much of her life. Every day felt like it had built to this moment. The long hours, the painful reflection, the public scrutiny, and now, the weight of it all rested on what the judge would say. As the judge made his way to the bench, Cassandra could feel the collective breath of everyone in the room being held. Even the defense attorney, who had been so confident in his earlier arguments, seemed to have tempered his usual bravado. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with expectation. The judge cleared his throat and began to speak. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, including testimonies from both parties and a thorough review of the airline's policies and actions, this court has found in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Cassandra Williams. The airline's actions were not only improper, but were rooted in discriminatory practices. Ms. Williams was unjustly removed from the flight, and the failure to offer her any reasonable explanation or apology exacerbated the harm she experienced. Cassandra's heart slammed against her chest. The words felt like a lifeline, but they also carried the weight of everything she had been through. She had fought for this, for herself and for everyone who had suffered in silence. And now, it was finally happening. The world was seeing the truth. The judge continued, his voice steady. The airline is hereby ordered to issue a formal, public apology to Ms. Williams, acknowledging the racial bias that led to her mistreatment. Furthermore, they are to provide a financial settlement that reflects the harm done to Ms. Williams. This settlement is not only to compensate for the emotional distress and humiliation Ms. Williams endured, but also to ensure that similar incidents are prevented in the future through systemic changes within the airline's policies and training programs. Cassandra felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them back. She had done it. She had won. And, in a way, so had everyone else who had ever been told their experiences didn't matter. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about a public apology. It was about the recognition that people like her mattered, that her voice counted. The defense attorney looked visibly deflated, his smug expression gone. The airline executives who had sat in the back of the courtroom, stone-faced throughout the trial, looked suddenly smaller, their power slipping through their fingers like sand. It was as if the very foundation of their arrogance had been stripped away in a single moment. They had been exposed, and they were now forced to reckon with the harm they had caused. The judge wrapped up his remarks, his voice firm. This case should serve as a reminder that racial discrimination, in any form, has no place in this society. The actions of the defendant were not only unjust, but unlawful. I expect the airline to take immediate steps to address these issues, not just in their policies, but in their practices, to ensure that no other individual ever has to experience what Ms. Williams endured. The gavel came down, the sound sharp and final. A weight lifted off Cassandra's shoulders, but there was also a quiet exhaustion that followed. She had won, but the battle had taken a toll on her that no victory could erase. She had lost something in the process, her sense of innocence. Perhaps the idealism she once had about fairness in the system was now gone. She knew that even with this ruling, change would be slow, and the fight was far from over. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of relief. She had been vindicated, and in this moment, that was enough. She had stood up to the system, and the system had been forced to listen. As the courtroom began to empty, Lisa turned to Cassandra, a proud smile on her face. "You did it," she said softly, her voice full of admiration. "You've changed things, Cassandra, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been dismissed, ignored, or silenced." Cassandra nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered, "but I guess it's real enough." They walked out of the courtroom together, the door swinging shut behind them. Outside, the media waited. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust into her face. But this time, Cassandra didn't flinch. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the victor, and the world could see it. She turned to reporters and spoke clearly, her voice strong and confident. "I hope this case sends a message," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Not just to airlines, but to everyone. This fight isn't just about one incident. It's about changing the systems that allow these things to happen. We need to do better. We need to be better." The crowd went quiet for a moment, as if absorbing her words. Then, slowly, the reporters again asked questions, and Cassandra found herself answering, not with the trepidation of a woman fighting for recognition, but with the resolve of someone who had fought and won for justice. As they walked away from the courthouse, Cassandra couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle in her chest. There would be more battles. There would be more struggles ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Cassandra believed that things could change. She had seen it happen. And with that, she knew she wasn't alone.